My name is Christopher Lidke, and I want to talk about involving millennials in Lodge. This is an issue that, of course, a lot of people want to deal with, but some kind of fear, because we're always told about the millennials and what they do and how they've killed Applebee's, and these things kind of color our vision or bias our ideas when it comes to this entire generation. Yet these are the 20 to 40-year-olds that we need to draw into the Lodge. So I want to put out a few ideas. These are not necessarily the only ideas that are out there. These are just some that I have when it comes to getting the millennials into and getting them involved in the Lodge. Now, who are the millennials? They are generally those born in the 80s and 90s, sort of a general idea. So anyone that you know really from age 40 down to around late college age is probably going to be a millennial. And some of the things you need to know. These are the last generation who likely grew up initially without computers or the internet. Those things came later. For example, if you happen to be a 40-year-old, you may not have owned a computer until high school. And the internet really wasn't a useful thing until you really got into college. And even then, it was tricky, and PowerPoint wasn't a thing until college, just to give you some ideas from a technological perspective. Now, the millennials tend to be the most generous generation that we have ever known, based on or measured by giving per income. In other words, how much of their income they give as a percentage. They give more than pretty much any other generation. Over 81% of millennials will give to charity on a regular basis. And that's kind of a tricky thing. You would think, well, that means that we should market towards that. But in fact, millennials are so good at giving money, they don't need or feel the need to get together in a group to do so. They're happy to do so just on their computer at home or on their phone, wherever they happen to be. They also don't tend to trust institutions. They don't tend to be concerned with the history of the institution. It's all about what do you do and what is your relevance. And that's what I want to focus on here. So let's get concrete. Let's talk about some real concrete solutions to this problem. What can you do in the Lodge that would attract millennials, get them involved, and hopefully get them into some leadership positions? Now, fair warning. The following opinions and ideas are those currently held by myself and do not necessarily reflect the ideas or opinions of the Grand Lodge Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or Masonic body. They are a conglomeration of my ideas and those drawn from conversations and readings throughout the years. If you have a complaint, feel free to send them to me at ddgm11@wimasons.org. That being said, my goal in all of this is to give you a blueprint or a series of them, a lot of different options. Under no circumstances do I expect anyone or any lodge to use all of them. I'm just hoping that I throw some pasta at the wall and some of it sticks, and hopefully some of it's useful. So, my background is, of course, in education. I teach, and I think that education might be a perfect model for what we need to do, because from my perspective, I believe to draw in millennials and keep them involved, we need to be teachers above everything else. Now, this is the model that I tend to use for my classes. At the base of the pyramid, we have lectures and textbooks. This is foundational information. This is the basics. And of course, no one just reads a book and passes a class. There have to be other things on top of that, discussions and activities that help take these abstract and esoteric concepts that you're being taught and make them concrete, help you understand them. And at the top, we have exams. Now, obviously, we don't need exams in Masonry for what I'm talking about. We aren't dealing with ritual here. Instead, our pyramid might look something more like this. At the base of it is ritual. That is the foundational material. Of course, when you get ritual, no one goes through it and understands it completely. In fact, most of us sit there and go, wow, there is so much that I have no real comprehension of what I just went through. And then you go through posting and examination, but even that doesn't get across everything. So then we move up one more step. And of course, that's going to be Masonic education, which is really where those discussions and assignments exist. Finally, at the top, I put projects, and I will expand on those in a moment. So when it comes to ritual, I'm not really going to touch on it. That's not my concern here. That foundation should be stable in every lodge, and it is a concern that we will deal with at some future time. Masonic education and projects is where I want to focus, but right now I want to start with education. You'll notice that it takes the form or the place of what would be assignments and discussions anywhere else. Now, am I asking you to do assignments at every meeting? No, I'm asking you to provide education at every meeting. Now, this could be Masonic education, it could be something else, but it needs to be different. Because how many times have you shown up to a lodge meeting, there's education, and it's 10 minutes of someone reading out of a book? That doesn't help. We need something more out of education. So, what do we need? When we think of Masonic education, we think of all those books that we have, but what we need to do is take that book knowledge and translate it. Now, this is already done for you in a variety of places. You can find this information in the Short Talk Bulletins or the Short Talk Bulletin podcast. You can find it in the actual physical brochure for the Short Talk Bulletin. These would be things that you could read in lodge and then discuss. You can find materials that are written in the Masonic Journal by major Grand Lodge officers who are putting their thoughts out there for you to contemplate. They are not saying this is absolutely how it is. They're often providing you an interpretation, their understanding of a specific topic. And then, of course, we now have Masonic education in the new Wisconsin Freemasonry website, wifreemasons.org. You will see Introduction to Freemasonry. There's also educational resources there, which lists links to the Short Talk Bulletins, to blogs and books that are available online for free, and some other materials. We are also developing classes, but that is something completely separate. So there are sources for the education. Either way, what I'm looking for, hopefully, is for you to provide 10 to 15 minutes of Masonic education in a meeting. And that's it. 10 to 15 minutes. And you're saying, well, that's exactly what I've seen before. No one really wants it. They'd rather go home 10 or 15 minutes early. Here's the thing that needs to change. What we need to do is take that material, make sure it's interesting material, but then provide discussion. The speaker should be sitting there and be prepared with a series of open-ended questions, preferably the sort of questions that start with why, or why do you believe, or what is your interpretation, or how. These are big, open-ended questions. There is no right or wrong answer. The idea is people throw their views out there, they start to compare them, they start to conglomerate them, bring them together into their own understanding, so that brothers walk away with a much deeper understanding of what they just dealt with. So not only do we have the foundational material, in this case of the Masonic education at the base of that pyramid, but then the discussion builds on it and allows someone greater understanding. Now, I would also suggest that you not just do Masonic education, because after all, we talk about taking a good man and making him better, which from a philosophical perspective works great through Masonic education, but from a practical perspective, many of the people coming to us might not have had parents who taught them the basics of manliness, as it were. So, mix it up. Alternate the esoteric Masonic education with the practical. For example, if you have an accountant in the lodge, have him talk for 10 or 15 minutes about how to start a business or any number of other topics. A brewer in the lodge can talk about how to get into home brewing or how to disappoint baseball fans since whenever the Milwaukee Brewers started. If you have a scout leader, he can talk about outdoor skills. If you have a teacher, you might be able to talk about interesting presentations. Other people could come in and talk about how to buy a suit and get properly tailored, how to buy property. There's all sorts of skills that we have within the lodge that would be fantastic for someone to just throw a little bit out there, 10 or 15 minutes, and then have a discussion and let the questions flow and let things roll. And if this goes on for an hour on its own, awesome. I don't think anyone has ever walked away in the middle of a really interesting discussion and gone, wow, that was just too much. Obviously, let it be organic. If things fall apart after 5 minutes, then fine. Things fell apart that time after 5 minutes. You learn from it and you move on. Now let's talk about that final project, the tip of the pyramid. And here, I want to do something kind of different from what we typically do in lodges. I know some lodges do these things and some may not. So we are dealing with the projects at the tip of the pyramid. This is, in theory, taking ritual and that education and drawing it all together so that we can really take in that material and make ourselves better. The goal is to develop and share practical knowledge when it comes to the projects. What does that mean? That means, can you learn to cook for 100 people at a pancake breakfast? Can you learn to keep track of funds for said breakfast? Can you learn to go out and talk to people to get raffle prizes? It could be any number of different things, but it allows junior members of the lodge to work with older members who already have this knowledge and they can pass it down. This is how the lodge survives. Not by focusing on ritual, but by passing down practical, what's called institutional knowledge that will allow the next generation of brothers to be successful. So, there's some ideas of how to do this final project. I like the idea of an annual lodge project. Let's talk about an annual lodge project in the form of a community fundraiser. And here's the general model for that. This is how it generally works. You would pick a community organization. Maybe that's the worshipful master doing it. Maybe the lodge does. That organization can come in, present to the lodge. Then you can plan a fundraising calendar, hold fundraisers, present funds, and the story. Now, let's break this down for a second because this model is going to play in to just about everything else we get to. Picking the organization, that's kind of up to the lodge, whoever's going to do that. But then having them come into the lodge and present their needs, present who they are, present whatever information they can provide. And maybe this is an eye-opening experience. Maybe they come in and talk about a need that the community had that no one really knew that the community had. Next, you plan a fundraising calendar. You'll notice I didn't say fundraiser. I said a calendar. Imagine having 3 or 4 of these fundraisers throughout the year, all aimed at raising funds for the same group, so you can have a larger check. But by having multiple events, what you can do is split up the work. So it's not always, Brother Smith who always organizes the pancake breakfast. Brother Smith can organize the first one, but then he has an understudy working with him who can work with the next one. Or you can set up by office. So the wardens plan the first one, the deacons plan the next one, the stewards plan the next one, always passing the information down to the next group. This is incredibly important. This is how we teach the next generation. Then, of course, we have to hold these various fundraisers and then present the funds and the story. Now, presenting the funds, we're pretty good at as Masons. Big check, little check, doesn't matter. We hand it to people, we take a picture, we all smile. It's great. But what we typically miss is the story. And if we do this for a year, we have multiple fundraisers or multiple events going on that all tie into this one key theme, then we have a story. A story that we can share in the local press, or we can just share amongst ourselves, or with the new brother coming in, the new millennial. Instead of talking to him about, oh, we raise this money or we do this sort of in a generic sense, we can talk about the lodge did this last year, because actions will always speak louder than words. Now, let's say you don't want to do a fundraiser, you want to do something else. That's fine. Maybe you do a community involvement project. You could be a volunteer driver, as we see here. You could get involved doing some form of park or highway cleanup, which is really, really common. You could do meals. Now, one of the lodges I was involved with did orphan meals at Thanksgiving for a few years. And what they would do is basically, if you don't have anyone else to hang out with, come and hang out with us. We're going to put on this meal. We're going to provide X. You bring Y, or maybe we provide everything and it's free and you just come and eat. And think about how powerful that would be in your community. How fantastic that outreach is if you do that at, say, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. Or pick your holidays, pick your times, whatever it's going to be. But this could go one step further. Imagine that there's an emergency in your community. Suddenly the power's out, people don't have heat. Or suddenly some storm comes through. Making the lodge the center of community aid, a place that people can look to, and all you have to do is open up the lodge, talk to the people in the city beforehand, say, hey, in the event of an emergency, we are willing to open up our building and let you use it. Or we will open up our building and become a cooling center or a heating center, wherever the need is. That becomes very powerful to the community, but also to the millennials you're trying to bring in. Because again, you are doing something. Actions. You could also do a community education project. Try and get word out to the community about something specific. Yes, you could talk about masonry, but I'm looking for something bigger. So for example, you could talk about foster care and their needs. So instead of becoming the fundraisers, maybe you go out and you help foster care educate people. You sit around, you stand at booths, you talk to people who are interested, you just kind of volunteer your time. None of these are better or worse than any other option. It's entirely up to your lodge. Or if you want to go the community education route, you could hold candidate forums for local school board races, mayoral races, etc. in the lodge. Make the lodge a place where people know that you can go ahead and explore ideas, put ideas out there, and it just sort of lets the community know that you exist. It gives you a purpose. And the millennials are constantly looking for purpose and relevance. Just think about it right now. If someone walked in today and said, what is your relevance today? Why are you relevant as a Mason today? Either as a lodge or whatever, you might be having a hard time trying to come up with an answer to that. And it's not why do you exist, it's why are you relevant? All of these ideas are things that make you increasingly relevant within the community and more attractive to younger members. So let's tie this all up because I've thrown a number of ideas at you. First of all, I want to look at this model for handling Masonry moving forward. A model where ritual is just the base, just the start. Masonic education, or really it should be education overall, Masonic and practical, exists above that to A, help explain what you went through in ritual, and B, help you become that better man that we keep telling people we're going to do for them. And the problem is, if we don't, then why are we here? At the top, projects which take all of this information and tie it together in a nice, hopefully somewhat concise, and very concrete manner. How does this help? Because actions speak louder than words. This is going out and doing something. It's one thing to talk about how many presidents were Freemasons, but most of them are dead. It's not terribly relevant to people coming in. What they're looking for is the actions of the lodge. What have you done over the last year or two? So the more that you can do, the more that you can point to, the more attractive you become. Millennials want to be agents of change. And here's the thing. When Masons become teachers, we become incredibly powerful to the next generation, whether it's millennials or anyone else, because we have knowledge to give, but we have to be willing to give it. And the best way to do that is always by showing and teaching and finally letting people practice and helping them. If we are going to make good men better, we need to teach them how to do it. Go make it happen.